Imagine dedicating your entire life to a single truth, knowing that the ultimate reward on this earth would be a brutal, agonizing death. To understand the tragic final chapters of the 12 disciples, you must first understand who they were at the beginning. They were completely ordinary men. Fishermen with sun-beaten skin and calloused hands from pulling heavy nets in the freezing dawns of the Sea of Galilee, like Peter and Andrew. Tax collectors, despised by their own people, treated as outcasts, like Matthew. They walked the dusty roads of the first-century Middle East, facing the biting cold of the nights and the searing 40-degree heat of the days. They slept under the stars, often with empty stomachs, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs, depending entirely on the hospitality of strangers. They saw the impossible, raging storms silenced with a single command, the sick healed, and the dead walking out of tombs. They were 12 men who changed the world in a way no army, no philosopher, and no emperor ever could. But what happened after the resurrection? After the 40 days Jesus spent with them, healing their traumas, proving he was alive by eating roasted fish in front of them, and giving them a monumental mission. The biblical text grows strangely quiet on their final earthly fates. There are no detailed funerals registered, no grand epitaphs carved in marble. But history and ancient Christian tradition remember. Their final chapters were not filled with glory, wealth, or a peaceful old age surrounded by family. They were baptized in blood. They faced the wrath of paranoid emperors, the fury of hostile mobs, and the cold steel of executioners. How did men who once cowered in fear, abandoning their master and fleeing into the night, transform into fearless martyrs who walked willingly toward torture? The answer lies in the brutal, beautiful reality of their final moments. Have you ever wondered what it takes to break a man who has seen God face to face? James the Greater, the son of Zebedee, was the first of the inner circle to find out. This was a man who came from a prosperous fishing family, a man who once confidently, perhaps arrogantly, asked Jesus for a throne of honor in his kingdom. But his throne was a scaffold. Just over a decade after the resurrection, King Herod Agrippa IV, seeking to please the religious elite of Jerusalem, ordered James to be executed by the sword. Imagine the cold, damp stone of a Judean dungeon, the sharp, metallic slide of the executioner's blade. James didn't flinch. The ambition of his youth had been replaced by a quiet, unbreakable resolve. He was the first apostle to drink the cup of martyrdom. Then there is Philip. Philip was the disciple who seemed perpetually confused about the practical implications of the miracles he witnessed, always trying to calculate the impossible. Tradition tells us that his journey took him to the distant pagan city of Hierapolis in Phrygia. He didn't face a swift sword like James. He was scourged, his flesh torn by Roman whips, and then condemned to be crucified. As he hung dying under the burning Anatolian sun, he reportedly asked that his body be wrapped not in fine linen, but in simple papyrus. He felt utterly unworthy of receiving the same burial treatment as his Lord. These were not mythical heroes devoid of human fear. They were flesh and blood. They remembered the raw terror of that Thursday night in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they all fled to save their own lives. Yet, the same men who once hid behind locked doors were now standing before executioners with an unexplainable, almost unnatural peace. The resurrection they witnessed over those 40 days had completely rewired their minds. They no longer feared the men who could only kill the physical body. Imagine walking thousands of miles into the terrifying unknown, knowing with absolute certainty you will never see your homeland again. This was the fate of Thomas. We often remember him as the man of systematic doubts, the skeptic who demanded physical evidence, who needed to thrust his fingers into the scars of the nails before he would believe. But once he touched those wounds, his skepticism shattered into the most profound confession of the early church: "My Lord and my God." That concrete conviction drove him further than any other apostle. Thomas traveled to India, walking through the spice-scented markets of Kerala and the dusty plains of Chennai. He challenged the deeply entrenched caste systems, bringing a message of radical equality. His life ended on a hill in Mylapore, where he was ambushed and pierced through with spears. His blood soaked the foreign soil, a final visceral testament to the physical reality of the resurrected Christ he had once doubted. And what of Andrew? He was the quiet connector of the group, the man who always brought people to Jesus, the one who found the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. His path led him to the bitter cold and hostile crowds of Patras, Greece. Condemned to death by a Roman governor, Andrew requested to be crucified on an X-shaped cross, the crux decusata. He was not nailed, but bound with thick ropes to intentionally prolong the agony. Imagine the searing pain in his dislocated shoulders, the slow, agonizing asphyxiation stretching over 2 excruciating days. Yet, historical accounts say he did not weep or beg for mercy. Instead, he preached from that cross to the gathered crowd, using his dying breaths to connect people to Jesus, just as he had done in life. He transformed his instrument of torture into a final bloody pulpit. Andrew proved that the eternal message was far greater than the frail messenger's temporary suffering. What goes through the mind of a man about to die for a truth he once violently and publicly denied? Peter, the impulsive fisherman with a Galilean accent, knew this burden intimately. He was the man who swore absolute loyalty, only to curse and deny his master 3 times while warming his hands by a charcoal fire in the courtyard of the high priest. But Jesus had intentionally restored him by another fire of coals on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, asking him 3 times to feed his sheep. Decades later, in the suffocating shadow of Nero's circus in Rome, with the smell of burning pitch and blood thick in the air, Peter faced his ultimate test. Condemned to crucifixion, he looked at the rough wooden beams and made one final, staggering request: to be crucified upside down. He declared he was entirely unworthy to die in the exact same manner as his Lord. Imagine the physical horror, the blood rushing to his head, his lungs collapsing under the inverted weight of his own body. Yet, his final thoughts were not of fear, but of profound, eternal redemption. Consider Simon the Zealot. This was a man who once belonged to a radical movement of political resistance, a man who likely carried a hidden dagger in his cloak, ready to murder Roman collaborators in broad daylight. He had traded his violent, bloody rebellion against Rome for a spiritual revolution of grace. His missionary journey ended in Persia or Syria, where ancient tradition says he was sawed in half. Imagine the agonizing, vibrating teeth of the iron saw tearing slowly through bone, muscle, and sinew. Yet, he did not curse his executioners or call for political vengeance. The former political assassin had become a sacrificial lamb, completely surrendered to the will of God. Simon's transformation was absolute. The man who once sought to conquer by shedding the blood of others conquered the world by willingly shedding his own. Imagine being the only one left alive, carrying the crushing weight of memories that no one else on earth can fully understand. This was the agonizing paradox of John, the beloved disciple. While his brothers were slaughtered, John faced a different kind of torture: survival. Tradition holds he was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil in Rome, yet emerged miraculously unharmed. Exiled to the barren, rocky penal colony of Patmos, He endured grueling forced labor in the mines under the blistering sun. He lived to be an extremely old man, outliving all his martyred friends. Imagine his profound solitude. He remembered the exact smell of the salt air on the Sea of Galilee, the precise tone of Jesus' voice, the faces of his brothers who were now gone. He lived long enough to write his gospel and revelation, acting as a living bridge between the time of Christ and the next generation of believers. The tragic contrast to John is Judas Iscariot, the man who managed the group's finances. He walked the same dusty roads, saw the same impossible miracles, yet his heart grew cold and cynical. His end came before all the others, a brutal suicide born of crushing, unbearable remorse. He hanged himself in a lonely, desolate field, his body bursting open on the rocks below. He died in absolute despair, without ever seeing the glorious dawn of the resurrection. The silence of the biblical texts about the gruesome deaths of most apostles reminds us of a vital truth. The narrative was never meant to be a biography of men, but the announcement of a transcendent message. They were not forgotten. They simply became part of something infinitely larger than themselves. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of their sacrifice today, I want to know, which of the apostles' final moments struck you the most? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next journey into the untold history of the Bible. Imagine that you lived the greatest miracle in all of human history. Imagine what it is like to see an angel face to face, to feel the impossible taking shape within you, and to raise a son who would eventually divide time into a before and an after. Imagine the scent of dust and sweat from the Via Dolorosa, the agonizing sound of nails, the despair of standing at the foot of the cross, and later, the absolute awe of witnessing the empty tomb. And after all this, the book simply stops talking about you. Without any justification, without an official farewell, without a recorded funeral, without an epitaph carved in stone. This is exactly what happens with Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the pages of the Bible. The last verse that mentions her name is found in the first chapter of the book of Acts of the Apostles. She was there, in the upper room, surrounded by stone walls, praying fervently along with the disciples who, not long before, had abandoned her son. And after that exact moment, an absolute and impenetrable silence. Why? What happened to her in the intense years that followed? Had she been forgotten by the same men who were now leading the new faith? Or is there a much deeper and more intentional reason behind this documentary silence? To understand the silence at the end of her journey, it is essential to step back and realize who Mary was at her beginning. Nazareth, in the first century, was nothing more than a dusty and irrelevant village, hidden in the hills of Galilee. It was a place so insignificant that the culture of the time openly disdained it. Mary was not a figure of royalty. She was just a young Jewish woman, enveloped in the scorching heat of the Middle East, with calluses on her hands from daily labor. The New Testament does not describe her appearance, but summarizes her essence in one Greek word: ke charitamen, the one who was filled with grace. Her mysterious end is not a void. It is a powerful echo that we are about to explore.